A lawmaker in North Carolina says that the rent is too high, so he's pushing for rent control in the state of North Carolina. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of a place that I don't normally cover, and that's North Carolina. Now, North Carolina is not known to be a anti-landlord place. You know, they seem to support property rights. It seems to be a good place to be a real estate investor, but that doesn't mean that there aren't pockets of progressivism and there aren't pockets of these far left-leaning politicians in the state that really want to take away our rights. Okay, so right now, this politician up in the Raleigh-Durham area, he is pushing to have rent control within the state. Now, they say there's not a good chance of it passing, but just by the fact that he's proposing it tells me that there is some desire for this sort of thing to happen. Now, one of my biggest gripes with rent control is that no matter what the rent is, there's always going to be someone out there who it's not affordable for. Always. Okay. The rent could be $1 a month, and there would be people lined up. Oh, that's too much. That's too much, because their desire is to have the government pay 100% of the rent. They don't want to pay any rent whatsoever. They want the government to provide housing. So, it's really a stupid thing, in my opinion, to look at rent control and then think, oh, well, we're going to make housing more affordable and then everyone's going to be happy at that point, because it's just not going to happen. You look at places like New York or San Francisco, places that have had rent control for more than 50 years, and people are still talking about how unaffordable it is, how hard it is to find housing. So all of the issues rent control was supposed to solve, it didn't solve any of them. It didn't solve any of them. And if you're one of the few people who are lucky enough to actually have a rent controlled unit, well, your property that you're living in probably is facing a lot of maintenance issues, a lot of deferred maintenance in those properties, a lot of, just things are falling apart. Things are falling apart because the landlords don't have the money necessary in order to maintain these properties the way that they are supposed to be maintained. Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Are you surprised that, we're seeing calls for rent control in places like North Carolina? I told you that they were calling for rent control in Florida. I've told you that they were calling for rent control in Nevada. These are places that are traditionally landlord friendly, places that you would think, oh, well, they're never going to pass rent control. Even, I know I bring up Colorado, right? And Colorado is not known for being very landlord friendly, but they threw that proposal out there and they cut it down. They said, no, we don't want rent control here. So, it's kind of surprises me. But as the economy turns, we seem to see more and more places, including places that are traditionally more landlord friendly, that are more conservative, that are more right leaning. We are beginning to see more of these places that are looking at rent control. They're saying, hey, maybe this is what we need. And believe me when I say that if it was put up to voters, a lot of voters are going to vote for it. Okay, that doesn't mean it's going to pass, but the worse the economy gets, the more people who are going to be in support of this sort of thing. And that's why we have to get out there. We need to tell people the truth about rent control and make sure that these things, they don't pass. All right. So let's get into this article. This article is coming from IndieWeek.com, and it says, Raleigh City Council members throw support behind rent control bill. A Wake lawmaker introduced a bill proposing rent control in the General Assembly this session. It has little chance of passing, but 3 newly elected Raleigh council members are supporting the bill nonetheless. Yeah, of course they are. It's easy for city council members to support this thing when they know that, oh, well, our voters are primarily renters in a place like this. Now, I believe Raleigh-Durham is part of the Research Triangle, so that's, a lot of college kids in this area, a lot of renters, okay? A lot of renters. So if it was put up to a vote just in that area, I'm sure that it would pass. But since this is going over statewide, no way. No way. It's not going to happen. Sebastian Fernandez Geraldo, like many tenants in the Triangle, has seen his rent go up by hundreds of dollars in the last few years. We're all seeing double-digit rent increases, says Fernandez Geraldo, who is a community advocate with the Triangle Tenants Union. I've already seen my rent go up by like 10%. As the Indy previously reported, these rent increases have forced many to leave the Triangle, relocating to cheaper suburban or rural neighborhoods. If you have a car and a steady job, being forced to relocate outside of downtown Raleigh or Durham may not be such a big deal. But for people who are older or working a minimum wage job, rent hikes could leave them unemployed or unable to access critical resources like health care. This article is a joke. I mean, we're sitting here and we're saying, "Oh, well, you might not be able to live in the most expensive area in the entire town, the most popular area where the rents are the most expensive. You might have to move to the suburbs." And if you move to the suburbs, I mean, that's just not fair. This is a complete garbage argument, okay? Simply put, it is expensive in expensive areas. It is more expensive to live in Beverly Hills than it is to live in Compton. Okay? That's just the nature of things. This is a nice area. This is not as nice of an area. May you have to drive to work? Yes, absolutely. This is part of the reason why, I don't believe so much in public transportation. I believe that everyone should have the right to drive a car because that gives you the most options available when it comes to living where you want to live and working where you want to work. If you are stuck without a vehicle, you have to live where the bus line goes. You have to work on the bus line schedule, and you have no options other than that. Okay, so this is a garbage argument. Yes, if you are poorer and you have a lower income, you might have to live in a lower income area that is more cheap, be it suburban or rural or further out from downtown. I just want to give a personal example. Now, when I used to live in Kansas City when I was back in my 20s, right? I lived in Kansas City, Kansas, which is one of the least expensive areas in the entire Kansas City metropolitan area. Okay. But I drove 20 miles one way so that I could work every day out in the suburbs of Johnson County, Kansas, which is, a much more expensive, much nicer area. But it was much harder for me to afford when I was working at Walmart full time. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with that. You live where you can afford to live. You don't get the benefit and the option of the government stepping in there and demanding that the landlords charge you cheaper rent. That is a complete joke. In East Durham, you have massive gentrification, says Charles Becker, a professor of economics at Duke University. If you're an owner occupier, then okay, you make a capital gain. But about half the housing in Durham County is rental housing. And the people who are most vulnerable are elderly and poor. They're being displaced. As the Triangle undergoes an economic boom, landlords are rapidly raising rents to meet market rates. According to a 2023 report by the nonprofit North Carolina Housing Coalition, about 45% of renters in Wake County have difficulty affording their homes compared to only about 16% of homeowners. And these sort of statistics have always, boggled my mind. Yes, homeowners are more financially responsible. Okay, that's just the truth in general. Now, that doesn't mean that all renters don't know what they're doing with their money, but in general, homeowners have higher levels of financial responsibility by every single metric. Okay, they make more money, they save more money, they have more retirement savings, etc. Okay, and they oftentimes it is all linked to the fact that these people with more financial responsibility are able to afford to buy a home. Now, they also tend to be a tad bit older as well. Now, that's one thing that you don't think about a lot, right? But when you're younger, you're much more likely to rent, and you're also much more likely to make a lot less money and be in a lot worse financial positions. So, think of it more as okay, we have a lot of young people over here and they're still getting on their feet and they don't own homes yet. Then we have a lot of older people over here who are homeowners and they're already on their feet and they are working through their lives. So I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing, but these statistics are what they are. The bad thing is that they try to use these statistics to try to justify rent control and block the landlords from doing rent increases and pass other anti-landlord laws, and it has a detrimental impact on the area as a whole. Now, they even said in the article that landlords are just raising their rents up to market rate. They didn't say anything about landlords raising it beyond what the market could afford. I mean, Simply put, there are people who can afford to live in your place. If you raise the rent, then there isn't a problem. The problem is if landlords, and I don't know why they would do this, right? It wouldn't even make logical sense. They were saying, okay, the most that anyone is willing to pay for a one bedroom apartment is $1,000 a month, but I'm going to charge $5,000 a month. Nobody would be able to afford the place, and nobody would rent it. It would just sit empty because that's the way the market works. Okay. Now, if the landlord said, I'm going to charge $1,000 a month, well, everyone, that's what everyone is willing to pay. So everyone would be applying for that place and they would rent it and the landlord would rent it really quick. So, the free market works. The free market works. The rent control market is a false, it's garbage. It's complete garbage. I've gone over the failings of rent control so many times that, and I'm going to keep bringing it up. I'm not going to let it go. I'm not going to let it go ever, because I think it is one of the worst ideas and it absolutely has devastated landlords throughout the country.